All right, world history students. Today we're going to talk about Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was the location of the first known civilization in history. Here is a picture from modern times of the river, one of the rivers that Mesopotamia was located near, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. Mesopotamia is a couple of things, and on your note sheet you can see it says 1, 2, 3. And if you look over here, we have 1, 2, and 3 also, but we have highlighted colored words, and that's what you need to write on your note sheet. So first of all, Mesopotamia was the location of the first civilization, which was called Sumer, and you don't need to write all of that, just the part that's in blue, first civilization called Sumer. It was located in what is modern-day Iraq. Secondly, the word Mesopotamia is a Greek word that means land between two rivers. And those two rivers are going to be really important. We'll spend a lot of time talking about them. So land between two rivers is what you should write for number 2. And this is another name for a similar place called the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent is actually a little bit bigger. We'll look at a map together next. But it's located inside the Fertile Crescent. So here's Mesopotamia, and you have a map on your note sheet that has the Fertile Crescent highlighted, and inside the Fertile Crescent is the word Mesopotamia, right here between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. So what you need to do right now is to circle, please, just the area of Mesopotamia on your note sheet. So if I'm looking at the bigger map, it's like right about here. Mesopotamia is a part of the world that has great soil for growing crops. There's lots of nutrients for the plants to eat so that they can grow and grow things that you can eat. There are not a lot of natural barriers. There's not mountains in the way, there aren't oceans in the way. You can get there pretty easily. So it's easy to sit there and settle because you don't have to get over a bunch of stuff in order to get there from where you're coming from. And these are people who were very slowly migrating, mostly from Africa, like we talked about in our early man unit. Lastly, we have the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These rivers were violent. They flooded very often, but unpredictably. So you didn't know when a flood was going to come, but all of a sudden, this rushing mass of water would come down. It would sweep away your house. It would sweep away Grandma in her rocking chair. It would sweep away the soil that is holding down your crops. And then all of a sudden, your life is pretty much destroyed. You don't have anything to eat anymore. Hopefully you've saved something and kept it far enough away from the flood that it doesn't get taken along with the flood. But it is not a nice place to live. And living in a place where the rivers, which people depended on in order to be able to farm and be able to eat, were so violent and would come and wash stuff away all the time, made life pretty difficult. So, you've got these terrible, terrible rivers. How are you going to control them? The first thing you're going to do is create forms of irrigation. Irrigation means supplying something, usually crops, with water. And you can do that by building canals or ditches to help with the growth of crops. So the same way you wrote just the blue before, all you need to write is supply with water to help with growth of crops, or write the definition in your own words. It's bringing water from one place to another, is the very simple definition, bringing water from one place to another. Okay. So how were the people in Mesopotamia organized? They were organized into city-states. The Sumerians built cities, the people of Sumer built cities that were isolated. They were far away from each other. So they became their own city-state. A city-state means a city which has land around it that they use to farm and to support themselves. The city-states in Sumeria had high walls to protect them. And we'll talk a lot more about city-states when we talk about ancient Greece later in the year. For now, you need to write this definition on your note sheet: a city and its surrounding lands functioning as an independent political unit. That means they have their own king, their own whatever, they're not with the other cities. Mesopotamia's city-states were governed by monarchies. A monarchy is a government with a king in charge. That's what you need to write for monarchy. When the king died, his son would take over. And when you have a series of rulers who are all the children of the people who came before them, that is called a dynasty. So for dynasty, you need to write a series of rulers from the same family. Sumer also had a type of religion where the government and the religion were combined. So this means that the king was the head of the government and the head of the religion, was like the highest priest in the religion. And when you have the same person in charge of those two things, that is called a theocracy. A theocracy is a government which is controlled by religious leaders. We're going to talk about lots of places in the world this year that were theocracies. There are still places in the world today that have theocratic rulers or characteristics, and we'll talk about those later in the year as well. Okay, so let's talk about religion. These people were polytheistic. Polytheistic means that you worship more than one god, and this is a word you will see over and over again, and you must know what it means. In Mesopotamia, the gods they worshipped were usually connected to the natural world, and that's called animism. When gods or goddesses become part of natural beings and objects, that's called animism. So if trees have souls and rocks have souls, that's an animistic religion. The goal of religion for people in Mesopotamia was to please the gods, make them happy, and prevent their wrath, prevent them from coming and attacking the people. Mesopotamians believed that no matter what kind of life you led, you would go to a terrible underworld from which there is no escape when you die. So it didn't matter if you were a good person or a bad person, you need to please the gods now during your life so that they don't do bad things to you, like make the rivers flood and wash all your stuff away. But it doesn't really matter if you're good or bad when you go to the afterlife, because everyone is going to a terrible, terrible underworld that you will never, ever, ever leave for the rest of eternity. This is a picture of Enlil, who is the god of storms and air and the most powerful of the Mesopotamian gods. And he will come up again when we read part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is the most famous work of literature from Mesopotamia. Okay. Mesopotamians focused their city-states around ziggurats. Ziggurat means rising building, and this is what they looked like. They're kind of like a layer cake. They remind me of a wedding cake with their steps going up. Every single city-state has one. This was where all the religious and government activity took place. So if you needed to come and make a sacrifice to a god, or if you needed to pay your taxes, you would go to the same building. Turn over your note sheet to the back. You've got two sides to this triangle pyramid. One side says social status, one says economics. Right now you are just filling out on the social status side. So even though my lines go to both the right and the left, you're just writing on the left-hand side of this pyramid right now. So at the top of the social pyramid in ancient Mesopotamia are our rulers and priests. And remember, these were sometimes the same people. Then next we have our merchants, our artists, and our scribes. These are kind of everyday people, but they have specialized jobs. Then we have our farmers, and then we have our slaves. Slavery in Mesopotamia was not based on race. You became a slave because you were captured in a war, or because you owed money, and being a slave was the way to pay off your debt because you didn't have any money. On the economic side, what did each of these people do? The rulers were writing on the right side of your pyramid right now. The rulers collected money. The merchants, the scribes, the artists, they earn money by making or selling things. The farmers earn a living by growing food, and slaves do not get paid. They are slaves, they are not paid for their labor. A couple of things to add. You don't need to write anything right now, but I'm in the box under your pyramid where it says more about economics. The main crops that they grew were barley, wheat, and vegetables. Artists mostly made jewelry, textiles, which means cloth, and did leather working, so they would make things out of leather. There were big marketplaces in every city where you could go to trade or buy things. And they traded with people from very far away, including as far away as Egypt and India. And we know that because items from Mesopotamia have been found in those places, and items from those places were found in the markets in Mesopotamia. So we know that people were traveling long distances to trade. Okay. One of the characteristics of a civilization is that they have a way to keep records. And the way that the people in this part of the world kept records was with a written language called cuneiform or cuneiform. You can pronounce it either way, they're both correct, either one is fine. You have a picture on your note sheet of cuneiform. Under your record keeping box on your note sheet, in the first box, the one furthest to the left, you need to write cuneiform, which is the written language of the Sumerians. Boys who were trained to write, not everybody knew how to write, it was a special skill, would grow up to be scribes, and that would be their job. You would hire them if you needed a document written down. And this is a language that developed from pictograms. A pictogram is a symbol which is a picture that represents an object or a concept, an idea. So this symbol right here is a pictogram. You know what it represents. Okay, it represents mail or email. All right, and this is our little Gmail symbol. All right, so that is a pictogram, and that's the last thing you need to write. We'll talk about multiple places that are pictograms this year. Okay, moving down to cultural achievements. Like we said before, they were great at making jewelry. They also made pottery, which they used to store things in. We talked about that with the Neolithic Revolution. And they were sculptors. They played music. They built stringed instruments, pipes, flutes, tambourines. The most famous piece of writing from this place, and we'll talk about it in more detail, is the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh says, "The life that you are seeking, you will never find. When the gods created man, they allotted him to death, but life they retained for their own keeping." So listen, you are never going to get what you want. That's what that first sentence says. When the gods created man, they allotted to him death. Okay, men get to die. Life they retained for their own keeping. Life is for the gods, death is for man. You are never going to get what you want. This tells us a lot about the attitude of the people who lived in Mesopotamia. Not a happy, happy life these people were having. Okay, what about science and technology? The Mesopotamians made lots of advancements in basic math and geometry. They used a base of 60. That's where we get our 60 minutes in an hour and our 360 degrees in a circle. They made the first wheels to put on carts. They made plows, they made sailboats, they made bricks, and they built buildings out of bricks, out of mud bricks, which they baked in the sun. All of these are important achievements. The last thing that you need to know in your notes today is the most famous person from Mesopotamia, and that is King Hammurabi. King Hammurabi invaded Mesopotamia and took over the city-state of Babylonia. We'll talk about Babylonia a little bit more. Here is King Hammurabi and somebody talking to him. He is important because he created the world's first law code, which was called the Code of Hammurabi. You must know who this guy is. You must know the Code of Hammurabi. We're going to read part of it in class and talk about the laws. Some of them are pretty crazy. But you can tell just from looking at this picture that he is important. Because here is Hammurabi sitting on his throne. Sitting down, he's the same height as this guy who is standing up. So we know that if he stood up, he is like this tall. Okay? And in art, especially ancient art, size and importance definitely go together. So keep that in mind. Go back, get any notes that you missed, and I will see you in class.